Why did the martial vigor of the Romans decline in the late Roman Empire? Had the Romans become decadent and lazy, as Edward Gibbon famously implied in his classic Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire? Was the martial spirit of old gone, the Roman blood weak, and thus there was just no strength left in the native Roman population, so that the Western Roman Empire had to recruit more and more barbarian mercenaries that would fight in the service of Rome? Well, I hope that I will be able to show you in this video that Gibbon's view is really outdated, and the reasons as for why the Roman martial spirit had seemed to decline are manifold. It is very often wrongly portrayed that the late Western Roman Empire dissolved because they were inferior militarily with regards to the invading Germanic tribes. But as I showed in this video here, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the West won many impressive victories against the barbarians, and even as late as in the early 460s under Maiorianus did the Western Roman Empire saw some impressive military achievements, so much so that the Empire of the Occident was almost restored in those days. So why then was it that the empire still dissolved? It seems as if the native Romans had lost all will to defend their empire. They just gave up without a fight, and all the legions of the West that were destroyed in battle were never replenished. We have already analyzed that most of the Western legions were killed not in fights against the so-called barbarians, but in countless civil wars. In 383 AD, when Theodosius destroyed the Britannic legions of Magnus Maximus, in 394 when Theodosius again destroyed many Western legions at the Battle of the Frigidus, then in the early 410s when Constantius III destroyed the legions of Constantine III, and of course in the later civil wars of Aetius, Bonifacius and Flavius Felix. But every time that a legion was destroyed in these battles, no new legion was recruited. How could this be? Was the population of the empire not larger now than in the times of the Roman Republic? Were there now not more Romans instead of less Romans as compared to, say, 200 BC? And yet, during the days of the Mid-Republic, the Romans apparently had no trouble in recruiting new legions, time and time again, defeat after defeat against the invincible seeming Hannibal. In 218 BC, Hannibal defeated the Romans at Ticinus. In 217 BC, he inflicted a brutal defeat onto them at the Battle of the Trasimenic Lake. And famously, of course, in 216 BC, at the disastrous Battle of Cannae, where tens of thousands of Romans died. Or the 100,000 Romans that died when a large part of the Roman fleet was destroyed in 255 BC in a storm, which is still one of the largest naval disasters in history. But what happened afterwards? Did the Romans give up? Did they accept these overwhelming disasters? No, they recruited new men, time and time again, until against all odds they defeated the Carthaginians in the 3 Punic Wars. If the Romans had experienced such devastating defeats and disasters in the late empire, they would have not recruited a new army, and it would have been over. So how could this be? How could the Roman Republic so easily recruit new legions while the early Eastern and late Western Roman empires apparently could not? The Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD proved disastrous for the Eastern Roman Empire, as did the naval disaster of Cape Bon in 468 AD, about which I talked in this video here. The early Romans would have just recruited new armies after these defeats, while the late Romans apparently did not find any recruits. So it would appear that the late Romans had really become lazy and decadent. They did apparently not care anymore for their empire and just gave up against the barbarian invaders. Or did they? Well, there were several effects at play that caused the late Roman Empire to have severe trouble in finding new recruits for the legions. But before we get to that, if you are a Romaboo like me, and chances are high that if you are watching this video you are, then you might be interested in the incredible rings and other Roman accessories which SPQR Shop is building. They have legionary rings, they have rings with different themes, they even have coin replicas, statues, pendants, attributes and terracottas. And the most incredible thing is that they handcraft every single piece. That's right, this is really high quality handcrafted material. there is really no better present for yourself or someone you know who might be a Rome fan. I put the link to their shop in the video description and into the pinned comment, and with my link and by entering the Maiorianus code, you can get a 10% rebate on every purchase. So go and check out the assortment, it's really quite incredible. Now, the first reason why there was an apparent decline in martial vigor in the late Western and early Eastern Roman empires was the degradation of the quality of coins. I analyzed this notion in great detail in this video here, but in short, as a summary, the following happened. Because the Roman army had at some point become so large, which was necessary to defend the incredibly long frontiers of the empire, and because the emperors of the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries increased the pay of the army in order to secure its allegiance, the emperors had at some point to start severely debasing the currency. Which means that the content of silver and gold in the coins dropped more and more, so that the purchasing power went down, which in essence meant that the late Roman legionary of the 4th and 5th century would earn a lot less than a lucky legionary of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Therefore, of course, the motivation to join the legions of one's own free will was severely diminished with regards to the times of the Republic, when the silver and gold content of coins was basically 100%. Also, there were other perks in the times of the Republic and early Empire, such as a generous land donation for 20 years of military service, which of course also didn't exist anymore in the late Empire. This is one big reason why the late Roman Empire had extreme difficulties in finding new recruits. This is the reason why Stilicho wanted Illyricum, because the natives there showed strong resolve. They were used to war and battle-hardened, and so they didn't need such a high financial incentive in order to join the legions. Stilicho at some point even had to recruit slaves and gladiators in order to be able to defeat Radagaisus and Alaric in the 400s AD, because the native Italian population was just so reluctant to join the military. Theodosius also had to do the same in the 380s, making the fatal mistake to recruit large numbers of Gothic foederati because he had such trouble in finding native Roman recruits. Native Romans needed a higher financial incentive because they were used to a higher standard of living. In general, if someone is used to a higher living standard, he will demand more pay in order to risk his life. That's quite normal human nature. So therefore, only the border provinces of Illyricum or Pannonia would spawn good recruits in large enough numbers, or of course Germanic tribes, which were made foederati. These groups were content with less monetary incentives. This is a big reason why the Western Roman Empire had such difficulty in finding new recruits to replenish the lost legions of Magnus Maximus, of Eugenius and Arbogast, of Constantine III, and so on. But the empire was really now in a precarious situation. The monetary incentive was not high because of the low quality of coins. Thus, the empire had to increase taxes in order to be able to increase the state revenue, and thus to be able to spend more on finding new high-quality recruits. But this raising of the taxes was dangerous because it led to rebellions and decreased the motivation of the native population to fight for the Western Roman Empire even more. The Eastern Roman Empire luckily had the rich provinces of Egypt and the Levant that were geographically secure and yielded extremely high tax revenue even with a moderate tax demand. But the West had to increase taxes because the West lost territory after territory. Britannia in 407, Aquitania and large parts of Hispania to the Visigoths and Suevi in the 410s, and later Africa to the Vandals, which was especially brutal. In fact, the loss of tax revenue from the rich province of Africa was possibly the biggest contributing factor to the dissolution of the Western Roman Empire. So then, with all these territories effectively lost, the empire had to increase taxes even more, which would then drive the native Romans to actually sometimes embrace the barbarian invaders as liberators. Slaves and gladiators rebelled across the Western Empire. Thousands of gladiators even joined Alaric's Visigothic soldiers. The Baccaudai rebels sprung up everywhere under the brutal tax burden, and they fought against the Western legions. Aetius and Majorian, for example, defeated large Bacchaudai rebel bands, as stated by Sidonius Apollinaris. But these Bacchaudai often joined the barbarian invaders and helped them, and many other native Romans were sometimes even willfully joining the barbarian invaders. So a low monetary incentive was one reason why the empire could not find new high-quality recruits anymore, and thus had to rely more and more on cheaper barbarian mercenaries. But they were of course not as loyal as native Roman comitatenses, which caused a whole new set of problems. So the empire really had to raise taxes, which caused even more rebellions and secessions from the empire. A vicious cycle. The Basques and the Armoricans, for instance, split away from the Western Roman Empire on their own, seeing the chance come in the 410s and 420s to free themselves from the high imperial tax burden. The Moors did the same when the Vandals conquered Africa in the 430s. With this incredibly bad state revenue of the West, it is no wonder that the Western Roman Empire in its later stages just could not find any good recruits. It would have needed to probably increase the pay by an order of magnitude in order to increase the incentive of native Romans to join the legions, but that was simply not possible anymore by that time. Other factors that might have played a role was the disillusionment of the Romans with the empire. Cruel emperors, tyrants, incapable emperors, and the constant civil wars really lessened the motivation of the Romans to fight for the idea of the empire. In the time of the Republic, the Romans were expanding. The idea of Roman civilization seemed new and worthy of fighting for. But in the late Empire, after so many calamities and disasters, people were asking why they should even protect this idea of empire that seemed to create more problems than it solved. Then of course there was also the extremely high social inequality, which raised the incentive of slaves and the low social classes to rebel, and severely reduced their motivation to join the Roman army. Why should they fight for an empire that treated them so unfairly? Christianity might have also played a role in that it emphasized the role of the afterlife, where eternal bliss was waiting, so an earthly empire was simply not important and not worth defending. But this could have not played such a big role because the later Eastern Roman Empire had a very high martial vigor, for example under Belisarius, and it was almost completely Christianized after the 6th century. For me personally, the disastrous fiscal situation of the Western Roman Empire, with low military pay and low incentives in combination with high taxation, played the biggest role in explaining why the late Western Romans apparently had completely given up in fighting for their empire. But of course the psychological reasons of why should one fight for the idea of an empire that seemed to cause more trouble than good was also a very important contributing factor. So we can see that the Romans had not become lazy and degenerate, lying on the couch all day and eating grapes, or sitting in the Colosseum all day and watching games, while the empire fell apart. Far from it. This is an old trope and hopefully it will finally soon be put to rest. The late Romans just had far less incentives of fighting and risking their lives for the idea of Rome than the early Romans. And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting my work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. And I would especially like to thank our new Augustus supporters Lucian Popescu and Justinian and the Boys. Thank you so much Lucian Popescu and Justinian and the Boys for supporting this channel in such a generous way. And I would also like to thank our new Caesar supporter, Gary Myers. Thank you so much, Gary Myers, for your amazing support. Seriously, this channel would not work without our amazing Patreon and YouTube members, and I want to thank each and every one who is supporting this channel in any form. Gratias tibiago amici. And if you are interested in learning more about why the pay of late Roman soldiers declined, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in learning if the late Roman soldier was inferior to the early Roman soldier, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.